Today we have Dr. Pyle and Will Henderson in the chat today. Dr. Pyle is a professor at Clemson University in the Communications Department. His research focuses on social media, PR, and crisis communications. Will Henderson is the Associate Director of the Social Media Center. In this position, he assists faculty with research projects and opens up some amazing opportunities for students to engage with industry partners on social media. So first, if we get a little bit of background about the Social Media Listening Center.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Will Henderson. Like you said, thank you, Ryan, for the introduction. I'm the Associate Director at the Social Media Listening Center, and I've been in this position since November of 2019. So I'm fairly new to Clemson University and the Social Media Listening Center, but the SMLC, the Social Media Listening Center, is not new to Clemson. It has been at Clemson since 2012. It was actually one of the first social media listening centers ever to be at a university. So Clemson is the forerunner in utilizing social media listening when it comes to working with clients and working with research before any other university has started doing it.
Sure, and you talked about clients. Could you give an example about one of those?
Yeah, so we have a team of interns, both graduate and undergraduate students, work at the SMLC. This semester I have about 13 interns that work with researchers, that work with other faculty and clients, both internal and external clients. Some of those clients include Hubble Lighting, Sports Illustrated, WYFF News, other news outlets. We have SCEMD, South Carolina Emergency Management Division, which we'll discuss later in the call. We work with really incredible names within the both industry and academic space.
Sure. And then with transferring to e-learning, are the interns still able to access these resources and continue on with their projects?
Absolutely. From my virtual background, you see the Social Media Listening Center. So students hang out in there and work during their internship in that room in Daniel 304, but all of our software is web-based, meaning that even though we're doing e-learning and we're different places around the country, even the world, students are able to log into our software through their internet browser and still pull data for the clients to still run reports.
Oh, perfect. So that's great. So if we can move into a little bit about and bring Dr. Pyle into the conversation. So your research focuses on the South Carolina Department of Emergency Management, correct?
Yeah, Emergency Management Division. Yeah,
I'm sorry. Yes,
that's okay. And so yeah, I've had the opportunity for a couple of years now to work with them on social media listening and trying to increase their capacity to be actively engaged with state residents in digital spaces, which is something that they've wanted to do but have just had a hard time doing at times, just because it's a lot of time and energy and effort, and people are already stretched, right? We have a lot of things going, especially in a crisis. So
yeah, so a lot of people see social media as kind of like an outlet where they can post pictures of their food before they eat it, or a dog video. How are you guys using it in a crisis or emergency situation to help out?
Dogs and floaties and dogs wearing face masks, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
That's all I look at. Yeah.
No, it's funny because if you think about what goes into good social media management, you've got the funny parts of being on social media. But if you think about organizations that do a really good job connecting with their customers, you can look at examples of organizations that have demonstrated great customer service. If somebody has a problem, someone who is really taking the time to be present on social media. I think about the example of of airlines as not always a very good example of this, right? You know, you have the copied and pasted, please reach out and we will help you. Whereas you have other organizations, oftentimes small organizations, that have really made a concerted effort to be present and available. And so that's one facet of this is having people able to be here and listening to those conversations. But in the midst of a crisis or disaster, if you're someone like the emergency management division, then you're in that space to push out, you know, emergent information and to make sure people are informed, but also to make sure, you know, oh, somebody's talking about a missing person. Somebody's talking about a flooded roadway that we weren't aware of yet. Somebody's talking about, you know, a downed structure that nobody's responded to yet. You're looking for those kinds of things because oftentimes the first place those messages show up is in social media.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's allows for a level of awareness, situational awareness, and engagement that really wasn't possible, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago.
Sure. And how do you guys know? So someone could be posting about a missing person or a flash flood or something like that. How do you guys determine if that is credible? So, you know, one person could be talking about it, but maybe not everyone's talking about it. So how do you guys determine that?
That is a fantastic question.
Yeah, it all starts with one person tweeting about it. And usually I look at the lifetime of the Twitter account and the quality of the tweets before. If I see something questionable, like a missing person or anything like that, then I'll look back to see what did they post before. Are they just trolling? Are they just creating havoc on Twitter? If they have a historical posts that allude to just trolling or just causing disinformation, then yeah, I won't take it in consideration. I'll be aware of it, but if I see that you, Ryan Sweeney, were to tweet something and say, hey, somebody's missing, or we see this concern at Clemson or in South Carolina, even though you're in Connecticut, I'll still take that into consideration because I know that you are not a troll yet.
That's a big assumption. That is a big assumption.
Come on, we're in an interview, Dr. Pyle.
Sorry, I forgot.
All right. So, and you guys were talking about down structures. So that was your work during Hurricane Florence, correct? You guys worked with the department then?
Yeah. So there were messages about people who were stranded, people you know, who needed help figuring out things like shelter and food.
Okay.
And so those were, you know, people were going and posting in Facebook groups and places like that to try to get help and support. And we were able to extend the capacity for connection between people in those groups and South Carolina EMD.
So moving into kind of coronavirus and what you guys are doing right now, kind of what are you seeing right now in the social media listening center? that may be a lot to answer, but just like a...
What part? There's so many different topics and themes that we're seeing within the data, all the way from safety equipment to masks to even well-being of states and people to governor's orders. There's a lot of conversation and also a lot of noise.
Okay.
You have several things out there from Reopen South Carolina, but then you have another group that's fighting against it. But then we get into the people that are saying we're going to organize this protest, and if you're sick, come on out. It's your right to come out and protest. It's crazy. So there's a lot of different ways that we can dive down that path of what we're finding. A couple of the concerns that we initially saw when we started tracking were just concerns of incoming flights from other countries. When Clemson University made the decision to pull all of the study abroad students back, then that's when we started monitoring just to see what people were talking about when it came to not just Clemson students coming into the States, but also just tourists coming in from China or Europe into the States, and screening procedures. And we're able to see people talk about how family members and friends were not screened coming in from infected areas. Also, we were able to track how several people did a multiple stop flight into the States, but they had a layover in an area that according to them, they didn't even know about the coronavirus yet. And whenever I think one of the layovers was in Ireland, and somebody tweeted that the security in Ireland didn't even know about COVID-19, and then they went directly into the States, and they weren't even screened for a temperature or anything.
Wow.
So that's some of the initial data that we pulled. But now the conversation has evolved into more specific of are people finding the supplies they need? Do we find people in South Carolina who need help? What even organized protests are we tracking? And Andrew, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I would say that along with what Will's already mentioned, over the course of several weeks, we saw, I think, some interesting conversational peaks from week to week. So one week it was conversations about, we have students who are at risk because they rely on school systems for food. So what's happening, to help, and then people messaging about that. Another week you had people posting about how, Governor McMaster hadn't closed the state, and people were coming in from out of state to go to our beaches, and people upset about that. And then when most of the other states in the nation had passed stay-home orders and we hadn't, people were very critical of the governor. And you saw that as one of the biggest conversations in the state. And now looking at these attempts to organize protests, it's been interesting because you have no conversation, small conversation, giant increase in conversation. And we now know, because of investigative reporting at the national level, that each one of these protests has been organized and orchestrated by a small handful of groups. And they're going around and they're building support, and they're spending a lot of money to try to make these protests happen. And so we're seeing it happen in South Carolina now, where you had no conversation at all. Nobody was talking about #ReopenSC. Nobody was talking about going to the State House and protesting. And then you had national level actors beginning the conversations. And then slowly people who just live in South Carolina see those things and they say, yeah, I guess that sounds good to me. And the conversation builds. And so we're able to offer some additional levels of insight into how those conversations have started and how they're being shaped by people out of state. You always hear people talking, when there's some kind of protest about those people coming from out of town and stirring up trouble here. That's literally what we're talking about in this instance, is people from somewhere else in the nation, trying to get local residents to come to the State House and protest. And we can see that unfolding.
The organized protests in South Carolina, we were able to report that to South Carolina EMD within 24 hours of it being on Twitter. So we were able to, once we saw that, we were able to immediately send it both to SCEMD and the EOC.
With your findings, do you communicate that up the line, or do you make recommendations? Like, what do you do with that information?
So we report what we're finding. And if there's, if there's something happening, we will sometimes offer a little bit of our perspective on maybe a little bit of analysis, but once we pass it on, it's gone up the chain, right? We're not actually we're not offering suggestions on how anyone should proceed.
Got it.
We're providing intel.
What's, as far as like the conversation about reopening South Carolina or like keeping it closed down and pushback against Governor McMaster, what is kind of like the general feel about that from people in the area? And like, can you tell, like, are the majority leaning towards it, or does the center give you that kind of information?
I can tell you what I've seen, and then Will can follow up. He's been looking at it more closely the last day and a half or so, definitely. You saw President Trump tweet, "Liberate XYZ state," and he did a series of tweets about that. And as soon as those tweets hit, you saw people starting to mobilize messages in different states. And so the conversation in South Carolina went from literally 0 to a few hundred after President Trump tweeted that, and other people started those conversations. But then you also have this large conversation. Will, I don't know if you have numbers on this right now, but a large conversation saying this is ridiculous, this is a bad idea. And so you have people saying, President Trump, we need you to come down here to South Carolina and intervene and educate Governor McMaster on what America needs so that we can have, whatever. And, you have people responding and saying, this is really stupid. You're all, making horrible choices and being very, very critical. And the last time I checked, the argument against opening the state back up was much larger than the push to open it. But I haven't seen numbers in the last 24 hours.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me regarding the comparison between the two, but we do see that the themes of maybe 2 weeks ago, whenever people were calling for the stay-at-home order from Governor McMaster, that volume was huge because that was what people were talking about. But now we're seeing a completely different audience talk about reopening South Carolina. So people will tweet what they want to push. And usually that audience is larger than the people that will defend it on Twitter or attack against it. So the people that are talking about reopening South Carolina, they're on a campaign. They have a goal. So they may post 10 times a day and engage with several politicians with the hashtag reopen South Carolina or even hashtag Operation Gridlock. And the people that are against it, they may reply 1 or 2 times a day. So it's not as large.
What are the big hashtags you're seeing right now? Do you have that information?
For the Reopen SC conversation specifically, it's Reopen SC, Reopen America Now, and Drive to Thrive SC. But if you switch over to the broader conversations around the coronavirus, we're seeing things like, Will, can you pull up your word cloud from the most recent one from the report?
Yep, I can.
Not a lot of consistency in trending hashtags more broadly in the larger conversation, but people are talking about food, medicine, PPEs, about things like places. In the larger conversation, they are talking about places where protests are happening.
Okay.
And sorry, I'm just checking different.
Yeah, go ahead.
Then and the one where we're specifically tracking conversations around anything medical related, the largest thing is hashtag stay home, or stay expletive home, if you will.
I can share my screen with you to show you this word cloud.
Yeah, that would be great.
So can you see this? So this is data pulled from South Carolina specific. And this is a word cloud of all the social media posts. The larger the word, the more it's been used. And the smaller the word, the least often it's been used. So we see that the top word within the last 4 months from January 20th to April 19th is state. Also, we see house right here. Then we see coronavirus pandemic, but then we have emojis like this questioning face and then the United States flag. McMaster is down here. Can you see my cursor?
Yep.
Great. Then we see Pelosi and President Trump are in the conversation. But then we have other places in South Carolina. People are concerned about Charleston up there in the top left. Then we have toilet paper. Then chloroquine, the conversation. Then just a random name, Tom.
Tom.
Right there. Tom, yes.
Could be Tom Cotton.
Right. But then we see so these are the positive topics. Then we are analyzing the negative topics. This analyzes sentiment. So in the previous one, this was talking about, these are all words in a positive light, and these are all the words in a negative light. So we see several key individuals in the conversation that people are talking about in negative light. Nancy Pelosi, Donald Trump, then we see Bill, Joe, Pelosi, Fox. We see several different variations of President Trump, and Donald Trump. But then we see people talking about Florida, and Tom's here again. So we see that we have different key words in both of these word clouds that people are talking about, both in positive and negative light. But also we see variations of the words, and people are talking about hydroxychloroquine in both negative and positive. So then we can go down to the emojis, the top emojis that people use in their Twitter posts or their Facebook posts. So this poll is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, and other public social media sources. We see the United States flag. Again, this is just South Carolina. United States flag. Then we see other international flags. Then we see a fist bump. Then we see the germ emoji. Then we see the clown emoji down here. Then let's go down to the top hashtags that you asked about. We see flatten the curve, coronavirus pandemic, SC news. Then we see the Wuhan coronavirus down here. Then Italy and SC tweets. Then we can go deeper into the demographics of out of the last 4 months in South Carolina. We see 60% male and 40% female discussing coronavirus. Then we are able to see the volume for each for the gender of on March 12th, we see that close to 70 men posted about the coronavirus, while 60 females 60 women posted about the coronavirus. Then we're able to see the top interests: family and parenting, politics, sports, books. Then we see the journalists and executives and the teachers and lecturers and artists. Those are the most active when it comes to social media posting, which makes sense because journalists, they're trying to get the story out there, research what the hot topic is. And teachers and lecturers, we're all affected by this. We've moved to e-learning. Colleges, public education, everyone has moved to online learning, and people are trying to rely on social media to get their message out. And then, then these are all the news stories. So we see the volume of the news and where it's coming from. We see Twitter, peak on March 12th, and then how that compares to the news volume, then the top news stories and news topics. So this is all data that we pull at the SMLC that we eventually send to clients or organizations throughout the state. This is really cool. This is one of my favorite screens here, where we can dive deeper into the sentiment per county, and well, not per county, but per city. Spartanburg, Orangeburg, Greenville, Columbia, Beaufort or Beaufort, heard it's pronounced both ways, and Aiken. We see that Spartanburg has the most negative sentiment. That means people are talking about in a negative light when it comes to comparing it to all the other cities in the state.
Is there a reason for that, or is it you just have the analytics?
Spartanburg is one of the top infected counties in South Carolina.
Well, you were talking about kind of the hashtags and all that. You were talking also a little bit about noise earlier in the chat. So a lot of memes and stuff like that use similar hashtags to what's going on with the national conversation. How do you guys filter that out? Should I stop sharing memes?
You are solely responsible.
I knew it.
I mean, that's just part of it. During Hurricane Florence, there were 30-something fake accounts created to post just garbage and troll people.
Okay.
That were born like a couple of days before the storm made landfall, and people just posting dumb stuff, and that's part of it. That always is, and so that's why it takes a certain amount of time to have an actual person going through data and checking on things and looking for stuff that is interesting, stuff that's important information, stuff that's legitimate, and stuff that's just garbage.
But how has volume and usage of social media increased during quarantine?
Good heavens. So I will say anecdotally, so this is not supported by numbers, but people appear to be spending a lot more time in digital spaces. And I'm sure somebody's got numbers on that, somebody other than Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. But I don't know. I mean, I know that I'm spending more time on social media, and we do see, I think, a lot of that happening. But in terms of conversations around some of the stuff we're tracking, the volume is pretty substantial. Like, Will, what is the most recent volume report from Brandwatch?
I see that regarding the conversation around coronavirus, 10,000 posts on April 16th. So that's pretty substantial. But I know that even just through my native Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook profile, and monitoring groups around various topics, whether it's Clemson groups or even South Carolina focused groups on Facebook, I have seen a huge increase in activity because people want that community, and they're not receiving that community anywhere else. Because what happens when a pandemic comes across your nation? It takes away, and you're quarantined to your house, and you are stuck with e-learning or Zooming. Some people are living by themselves. You are stripped away from any social interaction, and you want to find that community, whether it's through a Facebook group or Twitter or even a Reddit subreddit, or even through, I don't know, Animal Crossing. It doesn't matter. So any of those sources of community, then people are wanting and desiring that some kind of substitution for their face-to-face interaction with people. I think one thing that is pretty important to know about the community, and Ryan, you may have heard me talk about this with the Clemson Alumni Association, but it's amazing to watch the community online develop. And as people spend more time on Twitter or on Facebook and Facebook groups, we are seeing a huge cultural shift in a more, I would like to say, I hope this sticks, but a more caring community, to where people are involved in these social media communities and trying to fulfill the needs that other people have in their community. So we're able to see people posting, even in my neighborhood group. We have a Facebook group that I have seen one house bake cookies and post in the group and just handed out cookies during this quarantine time. Another person asked if they need any help from the tornado watch, or the tornado that came through South Carolina. And we're seeing that that's just one example in my neighborhood group, but we're seeing that in other community focused groups where people are standing up and supporting the elderly, the sick, providing resources. Even businesses are standing up in communities, and in these Facebook groups, businesses are providing resources for their local communities to survive and thrive.
What's the general like attitude? Can you tell the general attitude specifically in Clemson right now? And like, I'm guessing it's mostly encompassing Reopen South Carolina and stuff like that, but are there any things that you're just seeing in relation to Clemson going on in Clemson with social media?
So I've seen things like people posting about how they're handling homeschooling with their kids, people posting about ways they're trying to still create opportunities for their kids to have time outside, and for people with or without kids, talking about trying to take time to do things to, for mental health, the sake of mental health, to be active and do those kinds of things. And I think that those kinds of messages are the bulk of the things I'm seeing locally, like on my own personal feeds. We're also seeing a lot of things related to people asking for or offering help after the tornado. It hit Seneca really hard, as I'm sure you know. And so I'm seeing a lot of that, seeing people posting about, talking about where and how to donate homemade masks and things like that, talking about ways to be more involved in giving. Early on, it was a lot about donating to food pantries or providing resources for people who were food insecure, but in the last week and a half, it's been a lot about what to do for people who are now suddenly homeless or needing something because of the storms and that sort of thing. So I think that locally, the things that I'm seeing are more about how to keep having a normal-ish day-to-day life than it is about the state and national level conversations that we're seeing through the SMLC. I don't know, Will, what you're seeing.
That's about all I'm seeing as well. If you were to ask us that same question 2 weeks ago, it would have been totally different. But since the tornado hit the Pickens County very, very hard, and in the Seneca area, we have seen almost, I would say, at least 70% of the conversation, just from what I've looked at, move towards tornado cleanup and support for the families affected by the tornado. I have seen the stages of grief play through the the Clemson conversation when it came to going online. First, we had a denial, and then we had frustration, and now we're all the way down to acceptance, where people have stopped complaining about it, and stopped complaining about Zoom, and they're accepting, okay, this is the reality that we're living in right now. And now they're looking forward and moving ahead with, okay, what classes should I take this summer? What classes should I take in the fall? What do you think about this instructor? We still see one or two posts that we may look at, but other than that, the Clemson students have changed the entire conversation to more accepting of this situation.
Do you think the actions taken by President Clements and like the Board of Trustees and stuff with regards to the pass-fail, the exemption from exams, and the refunds helped with that acceptance?
Yes. I think without question, because until they messaged with a firm sort of, this is what we're doing, the issue was the unknown. Even I think it would have been, I think the conversation would have been different, even if they had just come down and said, there's not going to be a pass fail, there's not going to be a refund, whatever. I think the sort of, even people would have been mad about that, but there would have been a level of certainty, as opposed to, you know, the messaging that, you know, we're still trying to figure out those details. And so now that those things are more solidified, I think people are, yeah, I think absolutely that's a big contributing factor.
And I've got one more kind of unrelated question, but I'm really just curious about it. So you mentioned that Will was looking at TikTok. How do you collect data on TikTok?
Carefully.
We do have a software that we use that analyzes TikTok users and hashtags, and you just have to really know. We use that, but also we use the native TikTok platform. So you just really have to know what hashtags to search and what's deemed credible and not, and have a keen eye for what's new, because the TikTok platform, it doesn't really show you what's new. It just shows you the trending videos. So you just have to spend like 5 minutes going down and manually collect data on it. It's
tedious. I mean, but if you think about the kind of dumb stuff people put on TikTok, there are a lot of anecdotal examples of, you know, people foolishly posting themselves drinking on the job, posting about, you know, them, you know, stealing things, and so I think if you're, and not right now necessarily, because there's, you know, we're kind of in a lull, but in the midst of something that would be more of a an issue of some kind of concern, that's one space where people might be posting something that's, you know, important to community safety.
Thank you guys so much for coming on. You had a lot of great information about the Social Media Listening Center and your projects you're working on right now. So coming back in the fall, how would someone get involved if they wanted to?
Great question. So students, both undergrad and graduate students, are welcome to apply for an internship with the Social Media Listening Center. Just email me at wjhende@clemson.edu. Or you can come by the Social Media Listening Center and ask to speak with me, make an appointment, and then we can get you plugged in. That gives that provides a huge opportunity for students to get plugged in with real clients, and also working with analyzing and reporting social media data.
It's an amazing resume builder. So, I mean, if you're at all interested, it's definitely something to check out.
All right, perfect. Thank you guys so much for coming on, sharing your time with us, and we'll see you guys later.
Happy to do it. Thanks so much.
See ya.